So it's fair to say that our speaker this evening is one of the UK's foremost photographers, the winner of multiple awards, including Photographer of the Year at the British Press Awards, and having been a professional news photographer since 1989. Official photographer to the Prime Minister and author of what the Daily Mirror called one of the world's most iconic photographs. Edmund is also a keen fountaineer and a prolific poster in Fountain Pens UK with his amazing fountain pen shots. So we'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much for tuning in on a Saturday evening. Very much appreciated. So I put together a presentation that's a little bit about me and my career and my photojournalism and commercial photography, and then it's going to concentrate on obviously the pens, the pen photography, and some tips and guidance, and probably more importantly about my philosophy on how I photograph them, because I think a picture has to be more than just a snapshot. There's always more to it. Yes, I've been a news photographer since 1989, and this was a year into the job already as a press photographer, working for my second local paper already by this stage, which is called the Wembley Observer. Roll on to 94, and at the age of 24, I decided to go and photograph conflict, and I went to the Caucasus. This is a land called Nagorno-Karabakh. And jumping forward still, you know, we had this sort of film era, black and white color, and then all of a sudden digital cameras came on board and Photoshop and digital filing systems and so on. So it's been a really interesting sort of curve of change and modifying and moving forward. Alongside the press work, I've also worked a lot with PR companies and commercial corporate clients and so on. This was a shoot for the National Lottery with Jerry Hall. I always think of it as Beauty and the Beast when I see this sort of picture pop up. One of the more bizarre assignments, photographing an underwater poker tournament in St. Kitts and Nevis. I was walking up to photograph a concert in Hyde Park to celebrate Nelson Mandela's birthday, who was a guest of honor there. And probably the least shabby venue I've had for an exhibition. This was St. James's Palace. And I was a guest of Prince Andrew and Princess Eugenie. So I'm just walking around the exhibition with her, sort of explaining the imagery, which was shot at Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, where she's patron. Street photography around Brick Lane. This is backstage at the Opera. It's one of my favorite places to hang out and sort of photograph life as it happens, with singers and actors coming and going and getting ready and so on. Jumping into some pictures. This was in 1990, so a year after I started working as a professional photographer, as a news photographer, Mick Jagger at the Rolling Stones Urban Jungle Tour at Wembley Stadium. To this day, one of the most difficult assignments I've had, because the man just does not stop jumping around. It's astonishing. Wheelchair basketball. This picture was the first of my photographs to win an award, and it got a Kodak Regional Press Award for sports photography. And it kind of reinforced that I was on the right track for my chosen career. You know, this was the right thing that I was doing. Holocaust survivor Gina Turgo with a husband who was a British soldier who liberated Bergen-Belsen, and their eyes met and they fell in love, and it's a beautiful story. My first big award was for this picture. It was a reunion of an RAF officer after returning from the first Gulf War. And it's just a beautiful moment in what was a very dull press conference. And it ended up winning this big award and getting published everywhere in New York Grand Central Station, in a big exhibition at New York's Grand Central Station. It's one of the most important early assignments for me, I showed a picture earlier was from Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as it's known. This is a soldier walking back towards the front line. Portrait of a soldier in the trenches. And this bizarre thing for me was like the perfect illustration of a ceasefire. A ceasefire had been arranged about a week before, and I just thought, you know, sort of hang up your AKs and have a nap. It's pretty cool. Moving on, this was an assignment for AIM magazine, and I spent 4 weeks, 2 trips in this region, photographing the 10th anniversary of the earthquake in Armenia, which had devastated the entire region. This is on the day of the anniversary, people praying for the souls of the deceased. On to less serious stuff. It's my very first underwater shoot. Ended up in a 5-page spread in Dive magazine, which is quite noble. This is the underwater poker tournament I mentioned earlier, one of the most bizarre things I've ever had to do. And a great corporate client for many years has been Royal Mail. Sadly, no longer, but for many years I worked for them as their primary photographer for sort of press work. This is Tripping the Colour launch of stamps. This was a set of stamps on the Ice Age, and I came up with the concept for this. Lizzie Jagger for the National Lottery. Blessed Are the Cheesemakers. That's Alex James, bassist from Blur turned cheesemaker. This was a shoot for Asda. Sir Richard Branson for Virgin Atlantic. This was in Canada. It's a portrait commissioned by Gordon Ramsay himself for his then new restaurant called the Union Street Cafe. This was about 3-4 years ago. Probably my best known work though is from this awfully sad day on July the 7th in 2005, the London bombings. The big thing with the normal thing with a news photographer is you have a rough plan for the day. You get assigned your assignments usually the night before, sometimes that morning, and you've got stuff to go to. But the nature of news, the nature of the world is that things chop and change. And I was in the Natural History Museum waiting to photograph the world's largest uncut diamond, and I had all this special lighting and stuff with me. And we were in the green room with the rest of Fleet Street. And they were taking people through 2 by 2 to photograph this thing because of security. And all of a sudden, my phone rang, and the office said that there'd been an explosion at Aldgate. They thought it was some sort of electric fault. So for me to drop everything and go there, and it was like a Hollywood movie. As I started to leave, everyone else's phone started to go off, and then all of a sudden, you know, the plans obviously for the day had changed, and this sort of immense sadness settled in. And on my way to Aldgate, I got another call saying that there'd been another power surge explosion at Edgware Road. And as soon as my picture editor said that, I knew in my gut that this was a terrorist attack. It kind of took me back to 9/11, where one plane hitting a tower is an absolutely awful accident, could be an absolutely awful accident, but 2 planes just, you know, doesn't happen. It was the same concept here. And after a while, anyone who could walk, who was fit to walk, who wasn't caught up in the carriage, the bomb went off, started to come out, and you could tell from their expressions something awful had happened. And then there was this lull, and Gina Turgle came out being led by Paul Dadge. And this kind of problem was because it was literally underground. We had no idea if it was a terrorist attack in reality, what had happened, how bad was it, was anyone hurt? And when she came out with this burn mask on her face and trails of blood down her legs, it all of a sudden very deeply impacted me that yes, something truly awful had happened. It's people in a state of dazed confusion. this photograph was recognized by World Press Photo, which is the premier international competition on photojournalism, and was very humbled that it won third place in the news category. Ended up being exhibited in 88 cities around the world. This was the triage area in the Hilton Hotel. And then, of course, people rushing to newsstands and TV shops to find out, you know, what was going on, what had happened. No more depressive stuff. Sorry about that, but it's part of being a photojournalist. It's part of the journey. Amy Winehouse performing for Nelson Mandela. And I love photographing fashion. For me, fashion and Fashion Week is this complete opposite to the serious stuff. And it's a great kind of balancing tool for kind of, you know, bringing lighthearted loveliness compared to the dark, awful side that humanity sometimes has. So I just thought I'd share a couple of quick pictures from Fashion Week. So there's the one and only Naomi Campbell, who threw out every single photographer backstage, but for some bizarre reason let me stay. And to this day, I'm thankful to her for that. As was kindly mentioned in the introduction, I was a personal photographer to Tony Blair. I was one of a team of three. There was three of us, and we worked directly for the Prime Minister's office in Downing Street. I started photographing him from his campaigning days, and he was this amazing guy who then became Prime Minister, real breath of fresh air. And I worked very intimately with him until he took us to war. This was his last day. This shot was just as a normal member of the press, as opposed to working for him. That's just a quick dip into my sort of, you know, day job, as it were. I just wanted to give a quick feel of the kind of stuff that I do. But I thought I'd share my mindset on how I approach things. And although some of this is to do with the stuff I've shown, it's the same for any kind of photography. So, you know, when it comes to the pens, I'll start to build up an idea of how I want to photograph this pen. Why do I want to photograph this pen? What's interesting about this pen? What's the character in this pen? Every pen has a characteristic. Some are more bland, some are more deep, some are more obvious. So that's the first stage. And another thing that I always try and teach when I'm doing workshops and giving talks and stuff is that there's this kind of notion that you take a picture, that you snap a picture. For me, it's about making a picture. And just that little sort of nuance makes a massive difference in one's approach to photography. You know, we're not snatching a moment. We're looking and we're creating something. And it's very much the same with the pens. You know, it's often you'll see someone has just taken a quick snap of a pen and it's blurry and it's awfully lit and you can't tell even what make the thing is. And, you know, this isn't the right approach. That's snapping a picture as opposed to making it. In all photography, which literally translated means drawing with light, painting with light, the light is the most important aspect. So look for the light. That could be available light through a window or a lamp on the ceiling or a table lamp or something, or it could be artificial light that you introduce with an LED or a flash gun or whatever. Composition, that's what's inside the four edges of that picture, that rectangle. You know, look at what's in there. Is there anything extraneous? Is there anything distracting? Is there anything that shouldn't be in there? Have you chopped the end of the pen off without meaning to? Stuff like that. Look for the moment isn't about the pens, but that's kind of general, a very important general sort of tip. Be present and aware. if I bring that philosophy to the pens, it's about looking more deeply than just a cursory glance and pressing a button. How's that light reflecting? What can I see in the reflection of the nib? If it's a highly polished pen, am I getting some dodgy reflection that's distracting? So that's sort of being aware, being present in that composition, sort of looking around. And be gentle is, again, just a general kind of life lesson about photography. I just wanted to illustrate what I'm what I mean when I say lighting is the most important thing. Light is the most important thing. And I shot this series of pomegranates. So not pens, but it's a still life. So it's exactly the same conceptually. So it's the same subject, but completely different lighting. And this is the huge difference that how we light our subjects, our pens in our case, can make to the look and the feel, looking at something side on, looking at something from above, all different lighting, but everything that it's lighting that brings this pomegranate, this object to life. It finds its intricacy. This was a shot used by Panasonic in an international marketing campaign a couple of years ago, which was great of them to use that. But you can see how different I'm making these pictures. It's the same subject. It's all different sets. That's just a sequin piece of cloth in the background that I've put a light on, and it started to shimmer and sparkle. A little bit basic, but it's a nice formula on making a good photograph. Find an interesting subject, think of an interesting concept, good lighting, compose it properly, and you've basically got the ingredients for a good picture. I'm going to touch on camera gear a little bit, but it's not about the camera gear. It's more about how we sort of perceive an image, how we think of an image in our mind, and then go and shoot it. Obviously, cameras have changed a lot, and they've come a long way. And nowadays, most of us use smartphones for most people exclusively. And whilst the cameras have come on so much and so far, and they're sort of good, they're convenient. Even a pocket camera, a little pocket camera costing half, sometimes even a third of a top-end smartphone will produce much better pictures. So if photography or taking photography to a next level is really important, start to think about getting a nice, good pocket camera. And if anyone wants to get in touch afterwards and sort of discuss needs and so on, I'm happy to make some recommendations if I can on what might suit, because you'll get a much better picture. Three main reasons. One, the sensor, the digital sensor, will be much bigger, even on the smallest pocket camera compared to a smartphone. The smartphones is tiny. So the bigger the sensor, the better the quality will be of the picture, the less graininess and so on, the less fake digital processing needs to be done to sort of smooth things out. Sometimes you'll notice you've taken a picture of an intricate, beautiful nib on your smartphone, and then you sort of zoom into it, and it's all turns into mush. That's the digital processing, putting on some softening filters, which may work fine for skin, but it screws up any kind of detail that we want to photograph. The other reason with after the sensor is that you have full control. On smartphones, you have some control. On a camera, you have full control on the various settings, and the more you can leave it in automatic, but if you want to move on to the next steps, you can start to learn how to use the different things to get perfect color and perfect exposure, so it's not too dark, not too light. The lenses are also much better. So all of these things sort of add up to make a great picture. But one of the most important things, regardless of camera, is to get some sort of support, some sort of tripod for your camera. Now, if it's a smartphone, you can get a small tripod and a clamp that goes around the smartphone there. use that on the table to keep your camera steady. And the reason it's so important is for two reasons. One, when your camera is fixed, you can really concentrate on looking at the pen and looking at any reflections, looking at any shadows, really kind of investigating that frame deeply. And then, you're free to move the pen a little bit, or if you're using a light, you're free to move that light a little bit and keep looking at the camera, which is fixed, and sort of, light it to perfection, change the composition to perfection. The other reason is that it's always better to shoot without the built-in flash on the smartphones, on any camera really. So, if the light's not very bright, if it's kind of, say, for example, dusk or a very cloudy day outside, the camera will need to shoot a slow shutter speed, which means if there's movement in the camera, if you're hand holding it, you'll get a slightly shaky, blurry picture. Whereas with the camera on a tripod, it'll be much more stable. And most smartphones also have self-timers. So if it's a little bit sort of dull and dingy, it's best to stick it on the self-timer, touch the button, the camera will stop moving, the phone will stop moving because it's counting to 10, and then it'll take a picture. You get a beautifully sharp photograph. Probably most people know this already, but it's generally the same way on every smartphone. If we pretend, actually, let me just get this phone. So we've got a phone. We're looking at our subject. Wherever you touch, that's where the camera is going to try and focus. And with most phones, it's the same. When you touch and you drag up or you drag down, that's going to increase the exposure, make it brighter, or decrease the exposure, so make it darker. So when you're photographing your pen, figure out where you want to focus it, tap that, and then tap and hold, and then go up or down to make the light as good as can be for those conditions, to make the pen really stand out. And again, just to repeat, never, ever use the built-in flash. The worst way to light something is to have the light come straight out the camera in the same line as the lens, because that way you get this reflected light coming back, especially off a shiny object like a pen. And it fools the camera firstly, and usually the picture goes very dark. And secondly, you just get this flashback and no detail, and it's awful. So never use the flash in the phone. Bring the pen near a window, bring it near a table lamp, ceiling light, whatever light you have, and just let the camera shoot with the available light that's available to you, ideally with some sort of tripod. So this is basically the gear that I'm using. Last several years, I've been using Panasonic Lumix stuff, and there's two different ranges of cameras there. The bigger one is something called full frame, and the smaller one's called micro four thirds. Smaller, lighter, much cheaper, extraordinarily capable. So we've got a lot of choice to be able to shoot what we want. And the great thing with all of these types of cameras is, as I mentioned earlier, you have full control. And the way that I make my pictures is I'll often be using these things. So this one is called a color meter. Those who've done physics will know that light has got a color temperature in Kelvin of however many degrees. So with this gadget, it's very easy to measure the color of the light. So it's, when you take your picture, it's not too orange or too blue. You get more or less exact color. And then this one is called a light meter, which all cameras and smartphones have built in, but this is an exceptionally accurate way because it measures the light falling onto it. So if you were to take a picture of my face, you would have this here with the disc, the dome pointing towards the camera, because you're measuring how much light is falling on me. So to do things like ink samples and stuff, this is writing samples and stuff, that's a very accurate way. But all of this is taking stuff up to a different level. But I just wanted to share what I do and how I take my pictures. let there be light. Most important thing, as I mentioned. This is a portrait set up by a friend of mine called Kurt Moser. He's an ambrotype photographer. He uses these massive, huge cameras with glass plates. Beautiful work. But if you have a look at his lighting, none of the lights are just the lights. There's something covering the lights. There's something diffusing the light. These are called light modifiers. So diffusing the light, making it soft, is absolutely crucial. Crucial for portraiture, as you can see the light falling on Max Moore, who's a TV host. His face is very gentle, but equally as important for pens. Often more so because of the high reflectancy, and also, pen's a nightmare to photograph because it's, generally speaking, it's a cylinder. So you get this curved set of reflections. It's not just reflective in one plane. So unless you've got a dull ebonite or something like that, you get reflections from left, right, and center. So the softer the light, the less harsh reflections you'll get. And I'll show some examples of that later. But this is a portable studio type flash on the left-hand side. But on the top right, you can see two different modifiers. The square one's called a softbox. So the light goes in there, and then there's two layers of diffusion material, just white, colorless material, and that softens the light. And then the next one's an umbrella. And you can get two types of umbrellas: shoot-throughs, where they're a semi-opaque material, and you shoot the light through that and it softens, or you bounce the light through that, and when it comes back, it's a reflective umbrella, it softens. We've got constant, continuous lights nowadays, LED lights, and now it's kind of a lot easier to find a semi-decent one on, eBay or Amazon and so on, which will give you good, constant, consistent light. And again, another look at the softbox on both these pages. Different kinds of softboxes. There can be different shapes. They're not all sort of squares. So crucial points about lighting: try and use daylight. If you've got daylight available, it's just the easiest way to make a picture than try and worry about where to put your light and how to do this and how to do that. The softer the daylight, the better. So big blue sky, blaring sun blazing through that window is not ideal. If that's the case, if you've got white net curtains, close them, because that'll soften up the light. And if you imagine this is a window, and you've got rays of light coming out here, putting your subject in the middle of where the rays of light are coming isn't ideal. But if you look on the side where the light starts to feather and then starts to fade, this softer area on both sides would be a great place to put your subject. Could be a portrait, could be a pen. So that feathered, softer light on the edges is often a better place to put any kind of subject. So yeah, soften the light, as I mentioned. That can also be with some kitchen towel, or it could be with white bed sheet or something like that. Just one word of warning, I wouldn't put something like a kitchen towel on a sort of a normal tungsten bulb, because they get very hot. So if you're going to do anything like that, make sure it's not touching, make sure it's not going to get hot and go up in flames. Always keep the diffusion material away from the light anyway. You get softer light, but for safety, it's much more important. And if you are doing something like that, for God's sake, don't sort of stick it on and then go and have lunch or dinner and then come back, because, if it goes up, you won't be there to quickly put it out. But generally with LEDs and lights like that, then a bit of kitchen towel or bed sheet or something like that could soften it. Or you can just, if you can, hang a bed sheet near the window, off the window, to soften the light. Making the source of light as large as we can, gives us much better light. So this sort of pinpoint of light that comes out of camera flash, not very good. But if you can put a softbox on, it turns a light that's this big into this big. Or here's an LED panel. and it's not a much bigger softbox, but it's a softbox, and then there's a sheet of diffusion material. This is making the light bigger, and it's also making the light softer. So soft and big light is always a way to go. I don't know how well this is going to show. So this is it's a small LED light, which is sort of quite harsh. And I know the webcam's overexposing it tremendously. Sadly, we've got no control. But if I just put this kitchen towel around it, you can already see, even on this awful webcam, that it's made a difference in softening the light. So simple tricks like that will work. If you've got a diffusion material that's supplied with a light, if you stick that on, that's already going to soften things up. And then you can try the old paper towel trick, and it becomes even softer. Actually, you can see clearly that that's much softer than it was before. So this is making that light into a bigger light and softening it at the same time. So these are all good tips. Right. Never use built-in flash. I keep saying the same thing over and over again because it's the worst thing you can do. And as I mentioned earlier, don't use the on-camera flash on the smartphone, on a pocket camera, because when the light is along the same axis as the lens, you get that awful flashback. If you can imagine throwing a tennis ball and it's bouncing off the ground, the angle which it hits is the same angle that it comes up in. If you keep that kind of idea in mind, it's the same with light. So if you have a reflective surface, let's say this is a reflective pen, if the camera's here and the light is here, it's going to bounce straight up. Whereas if we put a light to the side, the light's going to hit the subject, but it's going to bounce off at a similar angle. So the light doesn't bounce back into the lens. And that way we don't get that sort of glare back. And we also get a little bit of modeling. You get a bit of shadow. It gives a three-dimensionality to the picture, as opposed to making it sort of awful, flat, shiny, reflective, yucky sort of picture. Check for reflections, as I mentioned before. And the very best thing that you can use is a reflector. A reflector basically is a piece of card that'll reflect the light. You can probably see all right. Can you see my face? How it's affecting the shadow side without reflector, with reflector. And this is just cardboard with just white paper on top of it. You can pick these up in Amazon for a few quid. Great thing with you could make your own, of course. Great thing with these ones is that on the other side you've got silver and black. Black is great for killing light if you want to create a silhouette, or for reflecting black. So if you're photographing a nib, I'll show you some pictures. Sometimes having a little bit of a black line or half the nib in a black reflection is quite nice. And the silver side reflects even more. You can see that that's reflecting even more than the white. So just with this, this piece of card that's a few quid, you've got various options on how to light. And then that's an A4 size, and there's an A3 size. And I use multiples of these, and I've got some behind the scenes stuff that I will share shortly where you can see these in use. So bouncing light, very, very cool way to go. Actually, let me just illustrate that as well. If I bring my little LED light back. So not that great. Can you see? This is much nicer quality of light bouncing off the card and coming back to my face. Right, as I promised, some behind the scenes stuff. So I'm going to share a few different sets of stuff from different sort of pictures that I've put together. This is using tiny little lights, not huge big ones, and And I've used them because of a very specific idea that I had, where I wanted pinpoints of focused light as opposed to bigger, softer light. The light at the top is actually the light that I was using a minute ago. But because it's so high up and it's diffused, it's producing a softer light. And then the two lights down below are much more focused. One with barn doors on the left. Those are doors that shape the way the light comes out. And the cone is called a snoot. So that sort of just throws out a circle of light, basically. And this is the shot I had in mind. The light with the barn doors is reflecting off the clip. The snoot is shooting through the translucent cap of this Pelican M600 vibrant orange, picking up the silhouette of the nib and the feed. And then the softer light from the top is just giving it a little bit of a rim light at the top of the cap and lighting a bit of the background. Onto bigger lights. This is the kind of lighting that I use most often. Probably 90% of the pictures you may have seen, 80% are shot with this light. So the thing at the top that says Aladdin is a large LED light, and it's actually what I've put up here to light me so I could show the reflecting bouncy stuff. It's a beautiful light. It's an LED and it's got a softbox on it, and it produces this nice big 2 foot by 1 foot light. Now, if you think about it, we're photographing a 15 centimeter pen. So who the hell uses a 2 foot wide, 1 foot deep light? As I mentioned earlier, the bigger the light, the nicer it gets, because it gives a soft overall light and also works well with reflecting. And I'll show you examples of what I mean when I get to show some pictures. So I've got the softbox from the top. It's quite close to actually where the pen is, which is kind of maybe 50 centimeters below it, 40 centimeters below it. On either side, I've got two A3 reflectors. You can see the whites. And then I've built myself a little stage and put some cloth over the top of it and clipped it in. So this is a side view. We've got the bed. We've got the reflector. I showed you one of those earlier. The light at the top. And we have our subject. And this one was actually shot on an iPhone. It's not the proper photograph, but I wanted to shoot one on an iPhone to use as an example. And in comes the proper camera on a proper tripod. And this was the set. And as the shoot progressed, and I was shooting different things, I then brought in another reflector underneath the pen, which creates a nice uplight and gives a little bit of a soft lighting to the bottom of the pen. It gives it more of a three-dimensional feel. And I will show my clamp at this stage. This is called a clamp, made by Wimberley or Wibberley. It's an American company. Sadly, you can't buy them here. You have to get them from the States, but Amazon will ship it, not a problem. And these are originally used for plant photographers, because this sort of gripping area has a bit of sponge, or you can use the plastic bit and sort of open and close it. And it's a great way of holding small things like pens. And then this other side just clamps to a table, or if you're doing plants, you can get ones with a spike that you just put in the ground and you can do macro pictures. But it's great for holding pens. Obviously, you can't photograph the entire pen in one go, but you know, for doing sections, it's a great way of isolating the pen safely whilst you play around with lights and so on, and take your picture. Another picture. Another setup. This is I was photographing the till breaker. Different lighting. This is called an ice light. It's kind of a LED wand, which produces. I mean, it looks quite harsh with the webcam, but it produces quite soft light.
Oh, that's a lightsaber.
It's or it's a lightsaber, yeah. So in this shot, there's two of these, and I've just clipped on a diffusion material around it. It looks very inelegant, but the lighting is beautiful. If you find the pictures on the group, you'll see how nicely it lit the teal breaker. So it's all about kind of thinking outside the box. It doesn't necessarily have to be this diffuser came with my light, so I'm going to use it. I just bought a piece of diffusion material and bulldog clipped it on top of this, and put a reflector. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's a reflector, and shot it. Another approach, which is using daylight, is to use a diffuser. As I mentioned, you could put close your neck curtains if you have them, or put up some bed sheet. On the left-hand side of this is a collapsible diffuser made by a company called Light, and it's just a semi-transparent white piece of polyester which lets some light through and it softens it. So if you've got harsh light from the window, all you need to do is put this between the window and your subject, and you get much softer light. So I was photographing a Ranga ebonite pen. As you can see, I've got the reflector there to reflect some of the light that's coming in back towards the picture. And here's the iPhone picture. It's not too shabby. It's picked up the details nicely. There's soft highlight along the side of the polished ebonite, as opposed to glaring sort of highlight, which detracts. And of course, the notebook and the set that I made with a bag underneath it. And here's the proper shot with a real camera. So that's a Lumix G9 on a tripod. And this is the proper picture. You can see it's much sharper. There's more detail. There's more subtlety in the tones. There's more detail in the shadows. So we just get used to looking at iPhone and Android pictures, but as soon as you put it next to a sort of any kind of camera, I mean, this G9, you can buy them for around £1,000. It's not, I mean, £1,000 is £1,000, but in camera speak, that's quite a bargain actually. And then another £400-500 for a lens. And you can see already that the jump in quality is tremendous. I want to just illustrate the importance of lighting and trying different things and finding out what works best for you. So I've done a series of shots of a Lamy and done different lighting with it. Clamped my iPhone in the tripod I showed earlier, and just shot a series of pictures. This is just with daylight. This is sort of more in dingier conditions with the curtains closed. This is daylight, but with a diffuser on the right-hand side, so kicking some light back in. This is again with the diffusers. As you can see, the light is softer. But this next one is flash. This is camera flash. And as you can see, it's actually not as bad as some pictures that you'll see with flash, but it's not great. It's too distracting with the reflection. You're not getting much detail. With this, I used the little LED that I showed earlier, just on its side. Okay, but it's creating that harsh shadow. Now I've put a reflector and softened that shadow. So card reflector on one side, light on the other side. And now I've put a kitchen towel around the LED as I showed earlier. Now you can see a much softer lighting. There's a little bit of a shadow to give it sculpting and depth, but you're getting to see the pen much more. You're getting to see the color much more. And this is, I mean, how many pence is one of these? It's great. And then afterwards you can wipe your mouth with it. So it's just simple stuff, it's thinking about just diffusing and also making the light bigger. This one was with the LED just pointing straight onto it. And again, just playing around with the LED, showing how without reflector, with reflector, piece of cardboard, that's all it is, white card. And it makes a massive, massive piece of difference. Just exploring different ways of lighting it. This is, same pen, same place, same camera phone. If I just scroll through a little bit quicker. And for the last I'm going to show you 4 pictures, so 2 different sets of images. Now I've used a different app on the phone called Halide. What Halide lets you do is shoot in RAW, so it's not the normal camera JPEG. And the good thing with RAW is that you get more control over, especially over white balance, and also having a little bit more detail in the shadows and the highlights. But it does mean that you need to process it. Now, I've also put in a white balance gray card. That's what this piece of plastic is on the left. And if ever you meet me, you'll see that I always have this in my wallet. It's constantly with me because you always need to get your color right. So I've taken one photograph with this, and then the next photograph, I've taken the gray card out of the picture and then shot it again. What the gray card lets me do is when I go to process the picture using software, and I process this on the phone using Adobe Lightroom Mobile, it let me take the collect color reading off the gray card, copy those readings, and then paste it onto this picture, which doesn't have the gray card in it. And we get a much, much better image. This picture was just with daylight, this sort of soft window, cloudy outside, daylight coming through. And the next picture I've done with LED lights, actually these, the ice light, the lightsaber that I showed earlier. And there's 2 of them. So one from either side of the pen. Again, I've used the gray card so I can get the correct white balance setting. And then in this one, I've processed it correctly, again, on the iPhone in Lightroom Mobile. And we've got a much more accurate color. We've got nice sculpting and so on. And these are just on the iPhone. You know, again, not as good as a proper phone, but, you know, if you want to just definitely keep using smartphones, you can move one step up by finding software that allows you to shoot RAW, getting a gray card from somewhere, getting software and learning how to use it. And it just helps you get much more accurate colors and so on. A little bit about my journey with pens. I mean, from school days, you know, we used to use fountain pens. In middle school, it was very much pencil, and then high school, although we had ball pens, I really enjoyed using fountain pens, primarily Parkers. And for some reason, gravity hated me. You know, every few months I would bend the nib because the pen rolled off, and of course, Sod's Law went nib first onto the ground. But I just really enjoyed the experience, so much so that in the early 80s, in my early teens, I started to look at calligraphy and got interested in calligraphy. I'm no good even to this day. I'm awful, but just trying brought a lot of joy. And, you know, writing letters to girlfriends and friends and doing a little bit of, you know, fake copperplate, you know, made me very popular at the time. And, you know, this stuff, I was thrilled when I found it in my mother's a few months ago. These are the various Osmeroids, and obviously in the middle on the right, and then a Schaefer set on the left. And yeah, really, really cool. And then in the late 80s, one of my A levels was graphical communication, so I got into rotoring isographs and so on. And one day at the graphics shop, I saw this. Rotoring had a fountain pen, and I loved it. Just absolutely brilliant. So in the late 80s, I bought myself a Rotoring 600. And again, when I found this at my mother's a few months ago, I was so happy. This is kind of part of my own personal history, and, you know, this thing still existed. And I brought it home and washed it, and it writes magnificently. Hard as a nail, but somehow it's just such a smooth writer. It's absolutely brilliant. And then moving on to the Millennium, I got this as a gift from an ex-girlfriend. And it stayed with me ever since. It's been a faithful companion. And I always realized that if I'm doing a long-term project on the computer where I'm sort of keeping a timesheet, one of my favorite parts was getting the Mont Blanc out to start making notes and logging the time and stuff. And, you know, even if it had dried out, I would not start working until I went and cleaned the pen out, put in a new cartridge, came back, sat down, and then started to log what I was doing and making notes about processing recipes and timesheets and so on. And so although everything has gone digital, this thing just kept me ticking along and really enjoying using my fountain pen. And through the lockdown, I don't know why, I started thinking about brass and thinking how much I like the feel of brass, and then thinking, oh yeah, I've got a brass pencil. I wonder if anyone makes a brass pen. And, Coeco, Sport, oh wow, look at that. It's really weird kind of shape. And then I started looking at the brass Sport and then realized this world that I didn't really know. All I knew was Mont Blanc, of course, my Rotring and Osmeroids and Parker. This world opened up. All these beautiful Japanese pens and all these amazing German pens that I never heard of. Oh my goodness, these Italian pens. And it was like, I ordered the Sport and I loved it. And then I got some more inks and I loved those. And then it just spiraled from there. And kind of a year on, all of a sudden, I've got a collection that's probably huge by some standards and minuscule by most standards, but it's sort of midway between 60 and 70 pens now, and absolutely love it. Toyuka Craft chest. If anyone needs a storage thing, I can't recommend these highly enough. So on to some pictures. Some of these you may have seen online, but you wouldn't have heard my commentary with them. So one of the things, as I said earlier, I always try and find the characteristic in a pen and come up with a concept or an idea to shoot it. Sometimes it's very simple, sometimes it's deeper, sometimes the idea comes immediately, sometimes it doesn't. The longest I've had to wait for an inspiration to strike has been a month. And that means the pen has sat there uninked for a month with me itching to see what the nib feels like, but not wanting to put ink on it because it will show up in the photographs. So this was pretty easy. It's a 1950s Pelican 140, and I have this Leica M3, as I was mentioning earlier, to Noah, same era of camera, both German, kind of goes together, same kind of feel and look, very simple. Safari theme with safaris, again, compass, green camera, and so on. But, it sets a nice mood and a color palette. Playing with themes again, Japanese urushi, wancha pen. The vibrant orange M600 that I was talking about earlier. And it's, sometimes it's really obvious, but it's fun. Find colors that go, light it so it's nice and vibrant, and shoot it. This was a lot of fun. Ben Walsh's Gravitas, Paisley Skittle Matte. And believe it or not, that's a shirt behind it, which I used to wear when I was younger and trendier. So that kind of went very well together. Lighting, it was a bit tricky. It took a while to get where I wanted to go, but I shot it. And some of these sets are pretty simple, pretty quick. The Leica and the Pelican, I probably had the shot in the bag in under half an hour, and it was daylight. But something like this Gravitas and some of the more complex stuff, I could be shooting for 4 or 5 hours until, I'm happy with what I've got. And it's all about minuscule lighting and movement. And of course, I'm approaching it in a totally different way, but that's how involved I get with some of these shoots. Back to the wancha. For me, the 149 was one of my was one of my Grail pens, and like it or not, it's a very established pen in the history of higher end fountain pens. And thinking about how I wanted to photograph it, what I wanted to show, and a big part of the characteristic, of course, is the nib and the sort of elegant, simple design, but is also the ink window. And I'd never seen anyone do anything with it. I kind of thought it's so obvious. So created this picture. And I'll come back to the 149 in a little bit. But this was my first Leonardo. This is the Stilo and Stile Momento Magico Tropical. And it's just so vibrant. It was so much fun to come up with an idea of how to photograph it, and it had to be crisp and vibrant and use Fabriano paper with their funky patterns and so on. And I just had so much fun photographing this. It was just a real joy to get this sort of vibrant character of this pen and make pictures with it. Really good fun. And because of these shots, I guess a sort of a professional friendship started to form with guys at Stilo and also Salvatore, who was so kind, commenting on the pictures. And then back to the elegance and the simple, understated 149 again. There's so little to this, but this understated elegance leads itself to its own type of photography, its own type of lighting. Very elegant, very simple. If you remember, when I was showing the reflectors, I was showing the black side and explaining why sometimes you might want a black. If you look at the bottom of the nib, half of it's in black. That's just reflecting black. And then the other side of the nib that's reflecting white is reflecting the softbox LED. And, this kind of dissecting the nib in half, I really like doing that with some nibs, not with everything, because it's a very powerful kind of compositional tool. Simple, elegant. The good blue. And this brass section is such a big signature for me that, the obvious thing for me was to play on the shape, the stopper, that sort of section that's taken out, which is unique, and then to work with that section and sort of really get this characteristic of this brass. And, for me, this was a picture that kind of brought those two characteristics together really well. This was the pen that stumped me for a month. And I was so keen to write with it, but I couldn't because I didn't want to sort of, put any ink on that nib or my grubby fingerprints on the urushi. This is the Platinum Izuma in Hakya Tamanori, is sort of greeny finish. Very, very subtle. It'll lighten up with time. But I couldn't come up with a good enough concept on how I wanted to photograph it. And then, back of my mind, thinking, and eventually I had this idea of how I wanted to do it. There's a great book called In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Kanizaki, who's a Japanese writer. And it's this whole philosophy of blackness and darkness and lacquerware and less is more and candles and we don't need bright lights and all this kind of stuff. And the whole thing just kind of slowly came together. And I finally could sit down and make these pictures. And I love this Art Deco clip, this sort of engraving on the clip. So, of course, had to work on that as well, with the light and the highlights and the shadows. And this was the picture for me. This is where I was leading up to. And it sort of came with this Japanese mood and theme and Kanizaki's In Praise of Shadows, and finally created a picture that I was happy with. And this is where the experiments with the droplets of ink started. So this was the first one I did. But, cheap Chinese pens. This is a 380 pen BBS. It's not about, I'm not a pretentious kind of pen guy. I just love interesting pens. And this thing, I ordered it so I could photograph it, basically. I just thought, oh, it's so cool. Look at that, until I can get myself a Decabot twist, this will do. Beautiful, beautiful pen. Surprisingly good writer as well. Back to the Lamy. Shapes and subtleties. Beautiful. The supremely elegant Grafton Faber-Castell Elemento. Again, it's finding a setting for the pen that will make it work to bring out what the pen is all about. Glorious nib, such a great nib. Back to the Lamy again, I really enjoy playing with translucence and finding interesting shapes and so on. This is backlit, so strong light at the back, reflectors at the front to reflect some of the light back into the pen. And you get this beautiful sort of silhouette. Same here, Pelican M 805 Blue Dunes. Similar concept to the orange one that I showed earlier. Again, backlit, bigger light on the backlight for this one. And Leonardo pens have a way of really waking up the creativity inside me. Every one I've got, it's kind of, I start to bubble over with ideas and so on. This was the mother of pearl. And of course, I bought a sheet of fake mother of pearl from some sort of guitar shop supplying place. But, you know, it's simple concept, but it's just a nice, finishes off the pen nicely. Such a great nib, beautiful elastic nib. And just, you know, reflections, lighting, playing, depth of field. As you can see, this one, most of the pen is out of focus. Just that ball on the clip, the wheel on the clip is in focus. This is called shallow depth of field. Usually use it in portraiture. You'll see people's eyes are in focus, but everything else is milky and soft. And for me, this clip is very, very kind of reminiscent of Italian pens. Leonardo's beautifully taking it forward, and it just fitted perfectly with this pen. Split in the background, doing something a little bit funky. This is the Fig Boot on pens collaboration with Leonardo, playing on the color, you know, watching the background, same color, finding a material that kind of echoes the resin. And this was a fun kind of weird concept I had. I decided to photograph the pens the way I would photograph a fashion model. It's not used in still life. This kind of lighting is not ever used for this kind of photography, but why not, you know? Pizzazz, bright colors, fashion, ring lights, vibrancy, something a bit different, right? Phenomenally interesting nib on the Pilot Justice 925, and my favorite ink on nib picture, just purely because it's got so many facets. It's just very, very interesting. Den's Skadi from Den's Custom Pens. Beautiful, vibrant, you know. Smythson notebook on top of a Rhodia notebook. Job done. Just playing with colors and shapes and angles, you know. The Big Boy by John Sanderson of Silver Bell Pens. Love this resin, love this pen. And again, as soon as I saw it, I started thinking about this kind of universe and funky sort of stuff. And I knew somewhere in my cupboard I had an old IKEA tile light. So took the top off, and that's just multicolored LEDs in the background. And this was pretty obvious, you know, Visconti, Bronze Age, playing on the lava. So it had to be a volcano, right? In fact, it is volcanic rock, but I've, of course, just lit it with red LEDs and then played around with the red LED on top of the nib as well. So you'll see streaks of red through the engraving. And then lit the coal with red, lit most of the pen with normal light, but there's elements of red coming in just to, again, play off this sort of molten lava theme. The glorious Pilot Custom Urushi. Absolutely wonderful pen. This first series of pictures are just clean, crisp images, just to show the design of the pen. They're just sort of high-end catalog shots, which is fine. But this is the kind of picture that I enjoy making, is coming up with an idea and a set and a concept that hopefully echoes a mood, a feel, a cultural note or something like that. And again, this kind of photography is never used in products in pens, you know, very, very shallow depth of field, but just puts this three-dimensional feel on the pen. these are all the same pen, all different settings, different shots, different ideas that come to mind. And this was actually the first shot that I did. And this is the pen placed on top of an electric heater. That's what that grill is. But the grill looked interesting. I thought, oh, that's nice. This could work. So it's just, it's always about looking and finding ideas and trying different things. If you look around your homes, you'll find so many different nooks and crannies that either have beautiful light that you hadn't noticed before because you hadn't really looked for it, or will have a great prop or backdrop or something to rest the pen on. Back to Leonardo again. This is a stunning pen. This is my this and the Mother of Pearl are my two favorites. Momento Zero Grande Primary Manipulation Bohemian Twilight, which is a pen that was done for Casa, the Stellografica in Italy. And again, it just gets so much inspiration. And for this particular pen, it's so annoying. I still haven't inked it up. I've had it for over a month because I keep having ideas of what I want to shoot. And for the next big shoot, I had to buy a load of props and different lighting. So I've got all that now. Now it's a case of finding time to make the picture. But it's just a stunning pen, so much depth to it. So many elements to play around. These are just cheap LED lights, multicolored LED lights, hanging off a backdrop in the background. Just here's the black again, as I mentioned, half lit, half reflected black. Our Teal Breaker. This was the set that I showed earlier. Beautiful colors. And then I had this idea of really bringing out the character of these colors. I mean, this isn't an accurate picture, but I feel it's an accurate feel of what the pen expresses to me. So half the pen was lit with blue light, half the pen was lit with red light, to make this sort of funky shot, and then back to sort of more accuracy and real pictures of this lovely pen. Pilot Custom 823. When in the winter, when it's bright sunrise, there's a block of flats next to mine, and there's this one window that reflects the light straight into my living room. And it's only there for about 5 minutes. As the sun moves, that reflection goes. But it just made such a nice picture, sort of shining off the clip and bringing a little bit of translucence to the pen. Now, this same pen, same place, same time, just totally different kind of picture. I decided to shoot it in silhouette. It's got quite a well-known shape and the clip with the ball, and have this sort of out of focus, sun reflected highlights in the background. Just makes for a fun shot. And then to finish the series, I decided to shoot the 823 at dusk with soft lighting, again playing on this sort of translucence of the black smoke finish. And my latest series is on the Good Blue and Ben's Custom Pens collaboration. Such a beautiful, beautiful resin, and again with that sort of signature brass. Put it on some white marble. And then here's the funky lighting. So far, we've got the sort of beautiful product lighting, which is interesting and it's nice. But this kind of brought out the design, sort of turned it up to 11. There's 3 lights on this. One light has got a blue gel, a blue filter on it, so it's pumping out blue light from the top right-hand corner. Then there's a small light with a snoot, putting out a circular white clear light, which I've used to illuminate the brass and the titanium nib. I've actually bounced it off the nib into the lens, hence giving that sort of highlight. And then there's a softer, bigger LED light, the Aladdin that I showed earlier, just softly lighting the rest. So you've got this mixture of colors and punchiness. Gorgeous titanium nib. Again, because I've got ideas to photograph this, I still haven't inked it up. It's this kind of restraint is character building. And of course, there's an element of heritage. So it's kind of showing, you know, the first in the batch, you know, the classic limited edition blue version with a new one. And just exploring. One other set I'll quickly show. I'll get an idea for a concept. And I had this idea of using a mirror and getting a double image. This is the one, Mont Blanc 149. I'm just playing around with the nib, double image, very close macro, all around lighting, reflectors and everything to give it that crisp look. And then starting to drip ink and playing around with the Homer Greek blue and seeing where the journey takes me. And the journey became very, very messy. I had a lot of cleaning to do after this, but you know, to get a picture like this makes me happy. It's something different. Mont Blanc themselves got in touch and said they love the picture, and it's great. It's great. A little bit about the sort of the software side of stuff. I had a few people ask me to talk about this during the presentation, and so I will. I'm a big believer, I'm a firm believer in getting it right in camera. I'm a very old school kind of photographer, although I use the latest gear available. The concept of photography for me is what happens in that box. It's not about fixing it later, adding stuff later, taking stuff out later in post-processing. You know, everyone thinks Photoshop is the way to fix stuff and is revolutionary, but in reality, you know, people have been doing that. People could do that in darkrooms already going back to the early 1900s. If you look into Soviet politics, you know, it was quite often people would be taken out of group pictures because they fell foul of the Communist Party and so on. So that sort of propaganda stuff has always been there. But for me, the art of photography, and it's an art of photography, is the craft of getting it right in camera. So when it comes to software, for me, I use software for two reasons. One is to edit, which means, let's say, for example, I have 50 pictures from a shoot. I'll go through all 50 and find the best, let's, for example, say 5. So it's finding the best pictures from that shoot, and it's looking at minuscule differences and so on. And then the second reason is to process those pictures. Processing means if the color needs a tiny bit of a tweak to do that, because I shoot in RAW, the pictures look quite soft, so you add sharpness, some clarity and so on. But it's not about, you know, adding stuff, taking stuff out, or fixing it. It's that final kind of 20% to finishing off the picture. And that's always been my philosophy from the days of black and white film. You know, when I was shooting, I'd already be thinking about the print that I'm going to make in the darkroom. And I would change my exposure accordingly to make it darker or lighter or whatever, because I knew I'm getting 70% of it here in the camera, and just finishing it is going to be that final 20-30% in the darkroom to make a perfect picture. And that philosophy stayed on with me into the digital realm. And I've worked very closely with Apple and Adobe on software. So I'm not a fuddy-duddy kind of old school guy. You know, this stuff is great, and I've helped develop 2 of the leading pieces of software. But I just think the craft of photography is the craft of photography. So, you know, nowadays we've got some amazing apps available on the iPhone and on Android or iPad, tablets and so on. This is Lightroom Mobile on an iPhone. This is what I use to shoot those Lamy pictures with the gray card that I showed earlier. And it's surprisingly competent. You know, from my proper cameras, the largest one I have shoots 47 megapixel file. And it's astonishing that with Wi-Fi, I can bring over a huge file like that into a phone and process it and send it. Before I shot with Lumix, I used to shoot with Olympus that also had built-in Wi-Fi. And on a visit by Barack Obama, it was raining, and he came to Downing Street. We all press packed were there, of course. We all took the pictures, and then my colleagues were desperately trying to find somewhere of opening up their MacBooks without waterlogging them. And because I had my Olympus, I just switched on the Wi-Fi, stood there with my Gore-Tex coat on, got my phone out, transferred pictures, edited, wrote the captions, processed, sent them on to my agent. And my colleagues were still trying to figure out how to keep dry. So, the technology is great. We can do a lot with this stuff. Lightroom Mobile is my first choice. And if you subscribe to Adobe Creative Cloud, then it opens up more features. Otherwise, with the free software, it's still very usable, but you don't get all the features. Another great piece of software on the phone for Android and Apple, Lightroom is Android and Apple as well, is Snapseed. This is by Google, Snapseed. It's a very, very good piece of software. Lets you do lots of funky stuff. But this is the main thing that I use, which is Adobe Lightroom Classic. And this is a screenshot from my Mac. Now my main library's got 950,000 pictures in it, which is astonishing. And this doesn't even include 14 years of film photography that happened before that. So it's amazing the archives we build going forward. One piece of unrelated advice, unrelated to fountain pens and so on, is with your family pictures and so on, start to use some keywords or captions, put people's names in the keywords or in the caption boxes, because in 20 years' time, if you want to find a picture of Uncle Joe, there's no way you're going to remember when it was or where it was, and you're going to waste probably a day flicking through folder after folder. Whereas if you put names in, you can just do a quick search. Very quickly, a picture will come up. I had an author, a book publisher get in touch looking for, I can't say because it's under NDA, but looking for a picture of an actress who'd passed a while ago. And through 950,000 pictures, it took about 4 seconds to find them. It's brilliant. So it's a good ethos, start to label stuff just so you can find it later. Right, that's me done with. Hopefully, I can see a few faces are still awake, which is wonderful. Thank you for coming. If you don't already, Fountain Pen Scribbles is my tag on Instagram. That's where I just put fountain pen and some other stationery related stuff. My main kind of day job stuff goes on to Terracopian, so at Terracopian on Instagram, and the website is terracopian.com. But yes, Q&A. Any questions?
Thank you very, very much. That was really, really interesting. And your photos are incredible. Lots and lots of love for those in the chat. I have been noting down some of the questions as we've been going through, because there's quite a few. So if I can just fire some at you, and then if anybody else wants to jump in. They're not in any particular order, but how was the change from film to digital? Did it feel like an instant change for you?
I'll tell you what the biggest change was, actually. In a way, bigger than that was the change from black and white film to color film. On the Harrow Observer, Wembley Observer, which is the second newspaper I worked in, we had an amazing team of journalists and photographers. It was absolutely brilliant. We had stuff in the national press weekly from stories that we'd worked on. It was a great place to be and a great time. And we really produced world-class stuff because we had this enthusiastic newsroom. So anyway, the switch to color came, and overnight we went from pretty good black and white photographers to kind of, and it took a while to realize that actually you don't need to overthink it. That's what we were doing. We were overthinking that switch to color. But the switch to digital was gradual. What happened was, we used to have a darkroom, we used to have wet chemistry and process the film, then make a print, and the sub-editor would use a ruler and chinograph and mark on the back of the print, all this kind of stuff, and then the courier would take it to the print works. And then what happened, then color came in, but we were still working with prints. But then we got a scanner to scan the prints in ourselves. So that was the first step to digital, and sort of starting to catalog stuff and captioning stuff. Then ISDN came in and was sending pictures digitally. The poor motorcycle couriers all got fired. And then the other step was scanners came in to scan in the negatives, and then digital cameras came in. So the software side had already kicked in. The digital workflow was already half there. And then the cameras came, and the cameras were awful. They were so bad. They were so bad. The picture I showed of me holding that big Kodak in my hand in the office with a big monitor, that was a £4,000 camera. That was the bottom of the range, Kodak DSLR. The top of the range was 20 grand. And this is when 20 grand was 20 grand, not that it isn't now, but, back then it was a lot, it was a much bigger chunk of money. And the cameras that we had, the camera would shoot at 1.5 frames a second. I could wind on quicker with my old film cameras, just using my thumb. And then it would take 3 pictures, and then it would take 11 seconds to write it to a spinning hard drive inside a cartridge called a PCMCIA cartridge. If you knocked it, it would corrupt and you would lose everything, right? So as a news photographer, I mean, it's not ideal. Now, but going back to the 11 seconds, just count to 11 and look at how much time passes. You're trying to photograph a football game, and for 11 seconds, there's 3 goals have been scored and you missed all of them because the camera is still spinning. Or in a portrait shoot even, you've got that decisive expressions. You shoot, and then, right, put the camera down. So what's your favorite color there? You can't do anything for 11 seconds. Absolutely awful. 100 to 400 ISO, which meant as soon as the light dropped a little bit, it just went home. It was pointless trying to work, So yeah, awful to begin with. And then relatively very quickly, probably 10 years, I guess. Yeah, in about 10 years have passed, and all of a sudden everything got to a point where it was actually usable and fine, and you could do stuff. And now we're at a place that, far exceeds the quality of film, not the feel of film, but the quality of film. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's been an interesting journey. But the switch to color was the biggest kind of,
So Neil did ask about the particular angling on a setup, but I don't know. Do you want to expand on that, Sunil, or did that get answered?
Just wanted to expand on that briefly, if that's okay. I noticed that when you showed us your standard setup, you had the softbox almost parallel to your stage surface where you had the pens on. And I was wondering what benefit you see from that versus angling the softbox to start to get some more shadows and depth and modeling.
Yeah, it all depends on the pen. It all depends on the pen, the finish, partly also the mood that you're trying to create. But generally speaking, and the pens and the behind the scenes that I showed, that softbox parallel to the bottom, pretty much straight top lighting is good enough, because then the 2 reflectors on the side, don't forget they're playing a massive role. They're reflecting the light back in. And then sometimes I'll have a small reflector at the front, or I'll have a reflector on the back as well, which will then catch in a reflection on either the body of the pen or on the nib of the pen. But also, I mean, imagine the cameras here, okay? I generally also often actually shoot that way. So it's slightly backlit, but the reflectors then kick enough light in from the sides. And if you notice, the reflectors on one of the picture, they weren't straight, they were like this. So I have one here. So, sorry, let me do that. So if we imagine the camera's here, the light is coming and it's hitting this and it's coming back into the picture as well. So I'd have the lens between two sets of reflectors. So you're creating this kind of pool of light. But there's no, someone asked days and days ago, tips and tricks. These steps are all important to start to experiment with and understand, but there isn't a single tip and trick on how to photograph a pen, because all the pens are so different. Even I say even because your stable is new, but even if I just look at the good blue pens, each one you've done is so different that one formula won't fit all of them, not to the standard that I want to photograph. That kind of Amazon catalog thing, they've got their lights fixed and a monkey could come in and press a button, There's no creativity to that. It's just a generic catalog, It's a generic Xerox kind of facsimile. But for me, it's very much think about it. I've got the concept, the set in mind, but I'm also now thinking about the light. Then try, you put the lights up, and with continuous lights, the great thing is, of course, we can see every small movement, what that does to the reflection and shadow and so on. But my starting point is generally speaking that. But then you saw from the vibrant orange pelican that I was using spotlights in a completely unorthodox way. But it's because I had a concept, and that's what I wanted to photograph. So to do, and forgive me, this isn't, I'm not trying to be immodest or praise me, but to do great photography, there's no formula for it. You need to understand light. You need to have go on this journey to understand this stuff. And then everything is unique. When I look at the master photographers and I look at stuff they produce or listen to the way they speak, I'm just kind of like, oh my God, wow, I've got so much to learn. And it's the same with stuff like this. There's no kind of, this is the formula, put one light here, one light here, one light here. This one is at this power, this one is at this power, and you make a picture. Things differ. So it's a case of, finding the character and then trying to bring that out in a picture.
Brilliant, thank you. And can I ask you just a quick follow-up question as well?
No, you've had your question.
Just really quickly, in all of this sort of, each image is unique because it's the subject of the image that's dictating or sort of driving the creativity or the concept. Where does the sort of thematic signature come in? Like every, well, I say every, but many photographers, you sometimes look at images and you're like, that was a Benson or whatever. Where is that? Do you feel like you work in some kind of signature that's instantly recognizable to your colleagues or professionals?
Thankfully, yes, but it's not a conscious decision. And very early on in my career, another newspaper photographer with whom I'm really good friends now, I'm thrilled to say, a guy called Nick Turpin, who back then was working for The Independent. And this is when The Independent was, oh my God, The Independent, every page was like a lesson in photography, and like you just walked into the best gallery of photography. And he said to me, and he said this thing when we were chatting, and it really stuck with me. He said, if you're conscious of a style, it's not your style, because style just happens. You just have to make pictures. You have to be honest to your subject, and you have to bring everything that you can out from that subject. And somewhere on that journey, people go, oh, that looks like a Nick Turpin, or that looks like a Robert Duano, or that looks like a Cartier-Bresson. And I'm humbled and thrilled that some people say to me, that really looks like your picture. Is it yours? And it's like, oh, great. But it's not something that you can be conscious of, because then it's fake.
You're not making it easy at all, but
Aren't you glad you asked your second question? But Sunil, I mean, seriously, I've been a professional photographer for 32 years, and an amateur photographer seriously for 4 years before that. And from the age of 8, I always liked to click the camera and take pictures. I'm a novice, and I've been doing this every day for 32 years. I look at the master photographers and I hear them speak, and I look at their work and I'm in absolute awe. And I'm also thinking that I'm wasting my time trying to be a photographer, because this is the thing with creative stuff. There's no kind of, tick, 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 you've done it. You've passed. Here you go. You've accomplished photography. Now go do something else. Because life is infinitely different. Even if we narrow life down, forget my photojournalism for a minute, which is constantly infinite. And I try to show different sides of what I do in a very clumsy, quick presentation, because of course we want to talk about pens, but even in my sort of exposure to life, it's infinitely different, and every day is different. Now, we narrow this down to something which should be easy, like pens, which are generally cylindrical and generally have a nib. But even they're all infinitely different. You can't compare a Mont Blanc to a Bennu. They're both pens, but you wouldn't photograph either both in the same way. You just wouldn't. You couldn't, right? As I said, your stable of beautiful pens, they're all different. I couldn't photograph them all in the same way. Look at what I did with the first one and compare it to what I did with the collaboration one. Totally different photography. Same shape, but totally different pens. So there's no easy answer, I'm afraid. Not if you want to really make photographs. If you want to do an Amazon catalog, yeah. Light, bing, 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 bing. Yeah. But it's no one goes to Amazon to go, oh, wow, look at that picture. It's great.
No, that's cool. That's really helpful. Thank you.
But hey, I have camera willing to travel, and I do this for a living. So open to commissions.
Brilliant.
Somebody's just asked that. Are you finding that companies are actually reaching out to you now?
I've had, I can't mention names. I've had one very, very definitive kind of approach, which let's see what it will come to. And then other companies kind of, gently. It's so weird, because I've worked with the biggest brands on the planet, been hired by them to shoot stuff. But the pen realm is, I know it's a very small kind of world, but it's slightly kind of a little bit gently, it's kind of not, we like your stuff. Can we have a chat? What would you charge? This is what we want for this kind of camp. It's a little bit different. I mean, there's brands that I would dearly love to shoot. I mean, really love to shoot for. I mean, Leonardo's the big obvious one for me. It's just their stuff always boils creativity in me. It just brings this passion of ideas and stuff. I just like what they do. But we'll see. I mean, my long-term aim is to get into this realm as a known commercial photographer. But realistically, I've only been doing this a year with fountain pens. Yeah. I walked into Sotheby's and I've put a £7 million ring in my hand for me to go and photograph. But just this sort of niche area, it's very new for me. Although I've done product photography before, obviously. So hopefully I'll get to a place where we'll go on to the next step.
You're right. It's quite a different arena as well to a lot of different marketplaces, and yeah. One of the photos, obviously, when you were showing us the setup, you showed us that you'd taken a photo with the iPhone, and then you were showing us the camera. Do you have two photos that you can show us next to each other?
So the picture at the top is on the iPhone, and the picture on the bottom is on the Lumix G9.
Right, okay.
So if you look at the picture on the top, all the dark areas have much less detail, whereas the picture on the bottom, all the dark areas have much more detail. You can actually see a lot of the swirls and stuff. the highlight areas on the top, it's actually done a good job, but the highlight areas on the bottom are actually more accurate. And there's a little bit more detail, if you zoom in and you look at the texture of the paper, especially on the left-hand side. But it's just a more accurate kind of depiction of what the reality of that picture was. Whereas the top one is just kind of a nice, snapshot, and that's with proper, it's with putting the diffuser in to diffuse the light, and it's got the reflector. So the lighting's there. So it's better than a kind of just a snapshot, but proper camera will do a much better job. And again, when I say proper camera, this is a Lumix G9. As I say, they're around £1,000 brand new. You'll find them cheaper secondhand. And then this is an Olympus macro lens, and this is absolutely bargain, 300 quid brand new. Again, you can find it cheaper, sort of used. So for 1,300 quid, you've got a system that actually is extremely capable. And I have another macro lens which is a little bit better than this, and that's about 450 quid. So for under 1,500 quid.
That is one of the next question about what macro lens do you tend to use?
Yeah, so that 30mm Olympus. So Olympus and Panasonic both use the same lens mount. It's called Micro Four Thirds. It's the size of the sensor and also the design of the lens mount. Right. So lenses from either brand will fit each other. There's cross compatibility. So on the Lumix G9, I have an Olympus 30mm and an Olympus 60mm macro. The 60mm macro is a better lens. It's, as I said, about 400-ish, 450 quid. It's a better lens. That lens is great, but it brings you so close to your subject that to light it becomes very difficult. It's actually trickier to light. Whereas the 60mm, you're further back, which makes it easier to light.
Right.
Then the daddy of them all is this. This is a Lumix S1R. So this is a full frame camera. And this is a Sigma 105mm macro, which is just phenomenally good. Absolutely stunningly good. And it's the new one that they've got. It's slightly different to the old version. And this is on the S series. This is L mount. So Sigma, Leica, and Lumix all share this mount. So lenses from all three will fit, right, as long as they're L mount lenses. And this is phenomenally good. But a lot of the stuff you'll see on my feed is on the cheaper camera. You don't have to spend 4 or 5 grand on equipment, especially nowadays, because there's so much good stuff out there. And most of the work we consume is done on a screen. So the quality has already been good enough for that for 5-10 years. This is great if you need to have something on a very high quality double page glossy magazine or on a very high end billboard or something like that. But it is overkill, to be honest. Just for the kind of stuff that we do.
I would like to call out, you just compared your button clicking to a monkey at one point, so I'll hold you to that in your after party.
Well, enough monkeys and typewriters, and Shakespeare will be written, right?
Paul Coates
and time.
Paul Coates actually suggested that you might want to look at doing a calendar of some description.
That would be good.
Oh, that's a nice idea. Yeah. I mean, I've had one person for fountain pens. I mean, I sell prints of my work, quite high end, very high quality, sort of collector's grade prints. So I did have some, I don't know where they were based, get in touch because they really wanted to buy a set of Mont Blanc nib prints for their office or home. We started chatting, but I haven't heard back. I think, again, people are kind of very gently, who's this Terracopian bloke, looks a bit scary, he's got a beard.
I've spoken to you about buying and making the charity picture of the Theo Breaker as well.
Yes, yeah. We of course, yeah, Bernardo, you need to get back to me. I completely forgot.
The end of the year, new job, and I need to talk about it. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you use an iPad as a light box?
You could, but the lighting, if you were on a tripod, then yes, you could. But
Right.
the light from an iPad's quite, even on its brightest setting, it's quite dim. It's not as powerful as an LED light. But you could do, yeah, absolutely, and it's soft enough. But the exposure will be quite a long exposure. So if you're hand holding it, you'd be shaking. So as long as you get a tripod, and you can get a decent one for 30. I mean, I say decent, but a usable one for 30, 40 quid for an iPhone. Perfectly usable. This is something I bought recently, and it's by a company called Benro. So it's a big full-on tripod. But what the great thing is about this is, so a tripod will go up and down, obviously, and you can photograph whatever's on the table. But with this central column comes out, and you can put it horizontally as well, which means if you want to photograph from above, it's a very handy way of shooting. I've had this for about a week, and it's really revolutionized how I'm working, because in the past I had 2 different tripods. If I wanted to do a sort of a, looking down, I had to take everything off, then bring the other one in, and then set that up. Whereas this thing, you could do both in one go.
The question on
big
that.
Go, the tripod's 170 quid, which is very good value for money for this level of. Yes, Gary, go on.
So a quick question on that, because I've got a very similar tripod to that. And one thing I've always tried to work out is, particularly if I've got the bar stretched far across, the weight of the camera is trying to pull the tripod over. You got any techniques or tricks for trying to keep the tripod in position?
Yeah, absolutely. It's you put a counterweight. So on this one, on the opposite end of the column, there's a hole to screw a hook into, and then I just hang a counterweight off it, so it
Right.
counterbalances it. Yeah, because even if you're moving further forward than say about this much with any kind of camera, it'll tip over.
Yeah,
So
that's
counterweight is crucial for that.
that's the problem I've got on when I'm doing my kitchen table. I'm moving 3/4 the length across.
Yeah.
At which point
you need a counterweight. And another thing, some tripods also will have a hook just underneath where the 3 legs meet, so you can hang a weight at the bottom of that.
All right. Okay.
The ideal thing is to hang a weight at the bottom of the column when the column is going horizontally. And I mean, a weight can just be a bag full of, I don't know, canned beans or something. It doesn't have to be a weight, but stick a couple of beans of a couple of cans of baked beans or whatever. That's kind of enough to balance, but absolutely crucial. Yeah.
So the next question that we had was, how do you keep your photo area dust free?
That's it's the worst thing. I use anti-static brushes to brush away the pens. Also, the synthetic cloths you use for cleaning glasses, they're very good. And then, just normal dusters and stuff on the surface. And, it doesn't matter how clean you've got everything, when you bring the picture up, there's still some speck of something. And so spend some time kind of getting rid of those little dust spots. I'm sure one of these sort of, an Intel dust-free, vacuum-sealed, whatever they call their Ponzi rooms where they make the chips, would be great for photography, but I don't think any of us could afford one of those.
Next question. You don't photograph writing much. Is there any particular reason for that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
You don't photograph writing much.
Because I don't find it interesting, or my writing's not interesting. I don't find it as interesting. For me, the aesthetic of the pens is what really drives me. And to be honest, I only do the writing samples and stuff because it's kind of the done thing, I guess. But for me, just purely for my creativity, it's the pen that's the most interesting kind of aspect of it. I mean, I love writing with them, obviously, I have done for decades. But maybe, if I wrote as beautifully as Apurva or some of our other talented sort of friends, it would be a little bit different. What I do find interesting, though, is really digging deep and getting really close to the texture of paper and ink and the way the fibers in, that's kind of interesting. And that's probably something I'll explore more and more. That's basically why. It's for me, the aesthetic of the pen is the thing that grabs me most.
I think that's predominantly most of the questions that we've had in the chat while you were talking. So I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in and ask anything.
Have I asked my fair share? Can I ask one more question?
Yes, of course.
It's a slightly more light-hearted question. What's your point of view on color, and what kind of colors excite you, both in, stuff that sparks your creativity as well as when you're setting up a composition for a shot?
Interesting question. There isn't, I guess, is the answer. It's if we're just looking at the pens, it's the whole thing. Every element has to be there for it to excite me. I mean, stuff that I photograph is stuff that I've got. So obviously there's an attraction for me to want to buy something. Sometimes it is just to photograph it, like the Pen BBS 380 is an obvious example. I wouldn't have just gone out to get a Pen BBS, but the look of this thing was so cool. And now that I've written with it, I'm like, okay. So I've bought another one, and it's even better as a writer. But there isn't kind of one color that gets me more enthused or more passionate. Sorry.
I guess the question came from, when you were talking about the Leonardos, it sounded very passionate when you spoke about, the really bright sort of colors that popped and how that almost inspired or made it quite obvious what you wanted to do with the frame.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, the tropical isn't Jonathan Brooks, but all the others are Jonathan Brooks. So I guess it's the way he manipulates his resins would be one. The Tropical was so different to anything that I would normally get, but I was intrigued enough to order one. And then when it came, I was like, whoa, Jesus, this is bright. And then sort of started to look at it and then started to kind of, so it wasn't, one color or the fact that every color's in there, but it was that it was the whole thing, It's like a great meal. It's a great dish of food, You don't really like it because one element is great. You like it because everything works. Everything comes together and sort of mingles. So yeah, it's not one element. Cheers. Yeah, it's not one element. I mean, on your pens, the two I've got, I showed earlier, the first classic blue one, I didn't buy it because of the tone of the blue or the tone of the brass, but it was the whole thing. It was like, wow, this is so cool, the flat edge and the shape, and it's so different. And then again, as soon as I saw the picture that Dennis first posted, I was like, whoa, look at that blue. But it wasn't just because it was blue, it was all of it, So it's an entirety thing for me.
Okay, interesting.
I have a
You
question.
really hate my answers, don't you? So I'm never going to another Pterocopian talk.
No, it's interesting because for me, my mind works automatically that way. I'm trying to deconstruct stuff and break it into elements, but the more I listen to you speak, the more it sounds like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the sum of the parts are the whole. There's no single element that overrides anything else. I think the meal analogy is perfect. Actually, you would never, I don't know, think of any dish, a pasta dish with some sort of sauce on it. You would never get that if you didn't really like the sauce, but the pasta you love. All of it has to work well together. And it's the same with anything. Sometimes I guess we might compromise on little details, but for me, the passion doesn't come because that pen's got a streak of green in it. It comes because the whole thing speaks to me. And you look at the Urushi pens, for example. In some way, they're very basic and simple, although there's a depth to it. And then you compare an Urushi pen with, a Brooks resin. Whoa, completely different. But they both have an attraction. They both have an aesthetic.
Have you thought on?
It'll get better the more wine I have.
Have you thought on an online course for just photographing pens?
Not just for photographing pens. I mean, I teach a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
It's since stopped, but I was a guest lecturer at the MA course in photojournalism at London College of Communication as well. And I've taught on behalf of Apple, Adobe, Panasonic, Olympus, Leica, Canon. I do my own workshops as well, mainly one-on-one, but I do group workshops and public talks as well. But fountain pen photography, I haven't. But my one-on-one bespoke workshops exist. So if someone wants to get serious, cool. Definitely get in touch. The mechanism is there, and we can do a workshop.
The day before a pen show might be quite cool. Go and do.
Yeah, but don't everyone book the day before?
I think a workshop at the pen show would be quite good, like Ruth mentioned a couple of days ago. I think if you could get a booking system via bins, etc. Like you could set up a table and stuff, and then you can get a workshop. I had a question, but then I read a more interesting question in the chat. So it's from Dave. Are there any pens you'd like to capture the story of creating the pen from concept resin to finished product, as so much of the personality is in how it arrives in our hands?
Yeah, great question. And that's been one of my ideas from the beginning when I started off on this photographic journey with the pens. Of course, with lockdowns and travel restrictions, the timing is absolutely useless. But my best work is telling a story. And this definitely came into it, is telling the story of the conception, from conception to finish of a certain pen. So yeah, absolutely. This is something that I definitely want to do. But again, it's, as a professional, I need to first get established in this field. I'm established in my field, but this is a whole new pond. So it's getting established in this field. And I feel humbled that so many brands have already reached out and been very kind with their feedback and comments and stuff. But yeah, this bringing my photojournalism and photo essays and storytelling to, amazing workshops like Yardo led. I'd love to go and visit Leonardo and photograph them at work. And yeah, I mean, so many places, go to Nakaya and look at all these Japanese pensioners who are so amazingly creative, with their urushi brushes and so on. It'd be great.
I'll ask my question now. You mentioned earlier about not using the pen, but perhaps you could even get some interesting shots, even with not even a dripping nib. But I feel like some of the engravings on the nib get really cool ink in them. So maybe you could try one of your ink pens next time. But I couldn't wait a month if I had a pen in hand to not ink it. So I don't know how you do it. But It's just a thought.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. I've done a few pictures like that. You know what it is? It's extremely difficult actually to photograph what you're saying the way you want it to happen.
Okay.
One of these things where you take a pen out after sort of inking. Oh wow, look at that! The channels are filled with ink.
Yeah.
And then you blink and then it's gone because it gets sucked up into the into the hole, or the feed gets it through the slit or something. It's those Mont Blanc nib shots I showed with the big loads of ink. It was astonishing. I must have wasted 40 milliliters of ink. Maybe not 40. Sorry, not 40.
That's a lot.
Probably 5 or 6. Not 40. I'm exaggerating now. But a good syringe. I had sort of about this much in a syringe, and I was just dripping it, and then it was disappearing. And I could drip a bit more, and sort of get the cable
sucked up by the feed,
and then it's disappearing because it's sucking it up.
Perhaps if the feed is saturated, actually, like if you prime the feed so that the feed is actually full of ink, doesn't work. Oh, okay.
It does. It still comes through, and then when it's saturated, it starts to drip out. If you look at the teal breaker shot, there's a big drop of ink coming actually off the feed. So I know of a way to do it, but it's a case of having to kill that nib and feed, and I don't want to do it to mine. But if a commission ever came from a manufacturer, that would be. I've got the know-how. Let's just hope the commission comes and we'll do it. But yeah, with a working pen, it just doesn't work. I've tried and tried and tried. And then the other weird thing that because I'm looking at so much minuscule detail with these cameras and lenses is, you leave that ink on the nib for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and it starts to dry. You start to get chromatography and spots and things that are fascinating but not photogenic.
Right.
Yeah, so it's actually it's something that I've been chasing, but it's quite complicated. But I know exactly what you mean, because when you take the nib out of the box,
because you can see it,
looks like so lovely.
Yeah,
but in a blink of an eye, it's gone. And because the problem is, you need to clamp the pen, you need to fine tune the lighting, then you need to shoot, and even if you're mega quick, that's already 30 seconds that's gone. I haven't given up though. Watch this space.
Another question: if there's a brand that you would love to work with, you've always fangirled about Leonardo, but is there another one that you think you would love to work with? I know you can't disclose the one who's approached you, but
what does it start with?
No.
First letter.
I'd love to work with Nakaya. The joy I had from finally photographing the Izumo was so good, and it's so subtle. That's the thing with Urushi; it's so subtle that it's actually very challenging to photograph it properly. I mean, to be honest, the pictures on Nakaya's website are crap. So that would be brilliant, to actually photograph it the way they should be photographed, to have that kind of,
I can send you mine. I can send you mine and you can take pictures of it.
Yeah, but you may not get it back. This might be a problem.
Oh, we can work out a deal.
Okay, let's see. Definitely.
I'll send you mine.
I love this group. It's so. Here's to your good health and happiness, folks. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.